I didn't tell you because I didn't want her to disappear. That's what his paralyzed son said right before Millionaire shut down his own surveillance system. When 12-year-old Noah Hale wheeled himself into the private security control room, everything stopped. Not gradually, not politely, stopped. The low murmur of monitors cut out as if someone had reached inside the room and turned down the world. A wall of screens glowed blue and silver. Frozen mid-motion hallways paused between footsteps. The garden locked in artificial twilight. The house caught holding its breath. Noah had never been allowed in here. His wheelchair bumped softly against the threshold. The sound is small for a room built to anticipate gunshots and alarms. One of the security men half rose from his chair, instinctively reaching for protocol, then hesitated. Children didn't cross this line, especially not children like Noah, children who moved slowly, who took up space in ways the world didn't know how to accommodate. A monitor flickered. Another stuttered, froze on a distorted frame of the east wing hallway. Noah's hands were trembling so violently the joystick rattled against the armrest. A plastic clatter that felt indecently loud. His fingers were pale, knuckles stretched tight, as if he were gripping something invisible. A thin line of blood traced down his wrist where the metal edge of his brace had rubbed raw, darkening as it followed the curve of his skin. No one spoke. Elliot Hale stood at the far end of the room, one hand resting on the glass desk he had imported from Milan because it felt solid. He owned cities on paper. He bent markets. He commanded silence without asking for it, but now he couldn't make himself move. Noah didn't look at the screens. He didn't look at the guards. His eyes were locked on the floor, on the thin red cable snaking toward the server wall. As if it were the only thing tethering him to the room, Noah, Elliot said finally, his voice unfamiliar to his own ears. It sounded smaller than he intended. "You're not supposed to be," Noah inhaled sharply. The sound cut Elliot off. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong, to shallow, to fast. Panic disguised as breath. The kind Elliot had heard once before. In a hospital room filled with machines that beeped instead of answering questions. The joystick slipped from Noah's fingers and struck the armrest with a dull knock. One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, maybe we should—" "No," Elliot said, without looking away from his son. The word came out sharp enough to sting. Noah swallowed. His throat moved visibly, like he was forcing something down that didn't want to go. "I wasn't spying," he said. His voice was thin, stretched tight. "I know I wasn't supposed to, but I didn't mean it like that." Elliot took a step closer, then another. The blood on Noah's wrist had begun to drip onto the matte black footplate of the chair. Bright against the dark, Elliot noticed it too late and too fully, the way guilt often arrives sudden, complete, impossible to undo. "Noah, you're bleeding," he said. Noah shook his head quickly. "It's fine," he said. "It always does that." The words landed wrong. "Too practiced. Too old for a 12-year-old." Elliot knelt in front of the chair, the expensive fabric of his suit creasing against the cold floor. He reached for Noah's hand and stopped just short, unsure if he was allowed. "Talk to me," he said. "What happened?" For a moment, Noah said nothing. The hum of the servers filled the space between them, steady and indifferent. The screens glowed, waiting to be watched. Then Noah finally looked up. His eyes were wet, but not spilling. He had learned, somehow, how to hold tears back like that, as if crying were another thing that cost too much. "I didn't tell you," he said quietly, each word placed with care, "because I didn't want her to disappear." The room seemed to tilt. One of the monitors flickered back to life, casting light across Noah's face. Elliot followed his gaze and realized, with a slow, terrible certainty, that whatever his son was protecting was already on the screen. This was a room where rules existed. Not the kind written down or posted on walls, no bold signage, no warnings in red, but rules that lived in posture and breath. Rules enforced by habit, by training, by the quiet understanding that mistakes made here did not stay mistakes for long. No unnecessary movement, no raised voices, no children. Especially not children like Noah. The security control room sat at the core of the estate, buried beneath layers of reinforced concrete and biometric locks. It was designed to anticipate danger before it arrived, to turn uncertainty into data. The air carried the faint tang of metal and ozone. The smell of electricity worked too hard and too long. Heat radiated from the servers lining the back wall, a constant, dry warmth that never changed with the seasons. 30 monitors stretched across the far wall in a perfect grid. Hallways, gates, stairwells, garden paths. Empty rooms that never truly slept. Each screen watched something different, yet together they formed a single, a blinking eye. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was surgical. Every sound that did exist, the hum of the servers, the software of cooling fans, the barely audible ticking of an unseen clock felt deliberate, measured. The room did not tolerate chaos. It dissected it. Noah's wheelchair felt suddenly enormous in the space, its small, imperfect noises amplified by the silence. The faint click of the motor, the soft shift of his weight. Even his breathing seemed loud, too human for a room that preferred patterns over people. Elliot Hale stood behind the glass desk at the center of it all, one hand resting flat against the surface as if grounding himself. The desk was pristine, untouched by fingerprints, the kind of surface designed to suggest control, power. He had built empires from rooms like this, commanded outcomes, predicted threats. Yet now, faced with his son sitting just feet away, Elliot couldn't decide what to do with his hands. They hovered uselessly at his sides, flexing once, then stilling. For the first time in years, there was no strategy forming behind his eyes. On one screen, the maid's quarters, a narrow room, neatly kept, a single bed tucked tight, a chair pushed flush against the wall. Nothing out of place, nothing suspicious. On another, Noah's bedroom, too familiar, too intimate. The angle caught the edge of his bed, the window where light filtered in each morning, the space beside it where his wheelchair rested when he slept. It was the kind of feed Elliot had insisted on after the accident. Protection, he had called it. Prevention. Now it felt like a confession. 3 security men stood off to the side, forming an unconscious line. Their shoulders were squared, their expressions neutral, but their eyes betrayed them. They shifted their weight subtly, one foot adjusting, then another. These were men trained to assess threats in seconds, to respond to raised voices, sudden movements, weapons drawn from waistbands. They did not know how to assess a child who didn't raise his voice at all. They did not know how to defend against questions. Elliot cleared his throat. The sound was loud in the quiet. "Why are you watching this feed?" he asked. His voice was steady, controlled, the voice of a man used to being answered. Noah didn't look at him. His gaze remained fixed on the screens, but not all of them, just 2. The maid's quarters, his bedroom, back and forth, as if something invisible connected them. His jaw tightened. The joystick lay out beneath his fingers, unmoving now, his hands resting in his lap. The blood on his wrist had dried to a darker smear, unnoticed. "I didn't mean to," Noah said finally, his voice barely above the hum of the servers. At first, Elliot stepped closer, stopping just behind the chair. "Then why keep watching?" He pressed. Noah swallowed. The rules of the room seemed to lean in, waiting for the wrong answer. "I wanted to make sure," Noah said. "Make sure of what?" Noah's shoulders lifted in a small, protective hunch. Still, he didn't turn around. "That it was real," he said. On the screen of the maid's quarters, the door opened. And for the first time since Noah entered the room, the security men leaned forward. Whatever this was, it was no longer contained by rules. Elliot noticed the bruise, then it sat just beneath Noah's left eye, a fading yellow ring edged with green, half hidden by the angle of the lights and the shadow cast by his brow. The kind of bruise that had already begun to heal, old enough to be forgotten, recent enough to matter. Elliot felt the delayed punch of it land in his chest, sharp and breath-stealing. "Who did that to you?" he asked. Noah shrugged. It was a small movement, barely there, but it carried weight. Kids who've learned not to trust adults always do that, make themselves smaller, turn pain into coincidence, offer answers that end conversations before they can become dangerous. "It was an accident," Noah said quickly. Too quickly. My chair tipped. The words came out rehearsed, smooth flat by repetition. Elliot had negotiated hostile takeovers with less resistance. He didn't argue, didn't contradict him. Instead, he lowered himself to the floor. The glass desk loomed behind him, immaculate and cold, but Elliot didn't lean against it. He crouched in front of Noah, careful to keep his voice level, his eyes soft. Not as a billionaire, not as a man who solved problems with money and leverage. Just a father. "Noah," he said. That was all. The room answered with silence. The servers hummed on, indifferent, their sound filling the space like a held breath. One of the monitors cycled through a camera angle, the image shifting slightly, but no one looked at it. Every pair of eyes in the room stayed on the boy in the wheelchair, and the man crouched in front of him. Noah's fingers curled into the fabric of his pants, uncurled, curled again. His gaze dropped to the floor, tracing invisible lines between the tiles. She thought I was asleep. He whispered. The words barely reached Elliot, but when they did, they landed heavy. Elliot didn't interrupt. He had learned the late. Perhaps that some truths needed room. My mom used to sing when she cleaned. Noah continued. His voice was steadier now, but fragile, like glass held up to the light. Not loud, just enough, like she was reminding herself she was still there. Elliot's throat tightened. After the accident, Noah said, and this time the word accident sounded sharp. No one sings anymore. His voice cracked not loudly, not dramatically. It fractured inward, a quiet break that felt final. The kind of sound people made when they had already cried alone and were tired of doing it again. Elliot felt the instinct to reach out, to pull his son close, surge through him. He stopped himself just short, afraid of startling him, afraid of breaking something more delicate than bone. She sings to me, Noah said. He lifted his head then, just enough for Elliot to see his eyes. They were bright, not with tears, but with something more dangerous, hope. At night, Noah went on, when she thinks I can't hear, or when my hands hurt too much to sleep, she doesn't touch the chair. She just sits there and sings like I'm normal. The word hung between them, unspoken, but understood. Elliot closed his eyes for a moment. Images flooded in meetings he'd missed, evenings spent behind glass walls, decisions justified by protection and necessity, cameras installed in the name of safety, distance mistaken for care, and if you fire her, Noah said softly. Elliot looked back at him. Noah swallowed. His chin trembled once, then steadied. It'll be quiet again. The room felt suddenly too small. Elliot exhaled slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might cause the truth to shatter. He saw it now, not just the bruise, not just the feeds on the screens, but the shape of his son's world. How narrow it had become. How much sound mattered when movement was limited. How singing could be the difference between surviving the night and enduring it. Elliot reached out then, finally, and placed his hand over Noah's. I'm not firing her, he said. Noah didn't smile. He just closed his eyes and let out a breath he'd been holding for much longer than anyone had known. One of the guards cleared his throat. It was a small sound, practiced, meant to reassert order. The kind of noise men made when emotions drifted too close to protocol. Sir, he said carefully, eyes flicking from Noah to the screens. We can't keep staff who aren't monitored closely. Liability. Elliot raised a hand. Not sharply, not angrily, just enough. The word died in the guard's mouth. Elliot didn't look at him. His attention had settled on one screen in particular, and it held him with a gravity no boardroom ever had. On the monitor, the maid Maria sat on the edge of Noah's bed. She didn't know she was being watched. Her uniform was loosened at the collar, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She wasn't cleaning. The vacuum stood untouched in the corner, cord coiled neatly at its base. Her focus was entirely on Noah. She had taken his hands in hers, not briskly, not clinically. She cradled them the way people held something fragile they didn't want to break. Her thumbs pressed slow circles into his palms, flexing each finger gently, patiently. Movements so small they might have looked meaningless to anyone else. But Elliot recognized the motion. Doctors had demonstrated it once, then dismissed it. No neural response, they had said. No functional return. The hands would stiffen over time, not strengthen. Yet Maria kept going. She leaned closer, her voice low, her words lost to the silent feed, but her expression said enough. Her mouth curved as she spoke, soft and rhythmic, as if telling a story she'd told many times before. Noah's shoulders relaxed. One finger twitched. Elliot's breath caught. The guard shifted again. Sir, regardless of intent, unsupervised interaction like this exposes us to. This isn't unsupervised, Elliot said quietly. The room stilled. He stepped closer to the monitors, the glass desk forgotten behind him. His reflection hovered faintly over the screen, a ghost layered over the image of his son and the woman beside him. Maria gestured with one hand, miming waves. Her other hand never left Noah's. She laughed at something, an unguarded, silent laugh, and Noah smiled in response. Not the tight, polite smile Elliot had learned to accept. This one was real. She was telling him about the ocean. Elliot knew it without hearing the words. About how water carries you if you stop fighting it. About floating. About trust. About surrender that isn't defeat. Elliot felt something in his chest loosen, then ache. This wasn't care as outlined in contracts. This wasn't safety as defined by insurance. This was presence. This wasn't part of her job description. The guard pressed, uneasy now. If something went wrong, Elliot turned. His expression wasn't angry, but it was resolved, and that unsettled the men more than shouting ever could. They had seen him ruthless in negotiations, cold in crises. They had never seen him like this. When my son stopped singing, Elliot said. No one filed a report. Silence followed. He turned back to the screens. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about what kind of man Elliot Hale was going to be. He had built a life around watching markets, competitors, threats. He had believed observation equaled control, protection. But here, in this room filled with eyes that never blinked, he saw the cost of that belief. Elliot reached forward. One by one, he powered down the monitors. The estate gates went dark. The corridors vanished. The gardens dissolved into black. Half the wall went blank. The hum of the servers shifting as systems disengaged. The guard stiffened, one stepping forward instinctively. Sir, erase the rest, Elliot said. His voice was steady. Now, certain, permanently. The word landed like a verdict. He paused with his hand resting on the console. Except this one. He tapped the screen showing Noah's room. Maria still sat there, still telling her story, still moving Noah's hands with infinite patience. This one stays, Elliot said, not as surveillance, but as witness. The guards exchanged glances. Rules were being rewritten in real time. Elliot crouched beside Noah again. I won't watch you like a problem anymore, he said quietly, and I won't punish kindness because it scares me. Noah stared at the screen, then up at his father. You promise? He asked. Elliot nodded. I promise. On the monitor, Maria leaned down and pressed Noah's hands together gently. And for the first time since the accident, something in that room felt like trust. Change never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with speeches or press releases or neatly packaged explanations. It seeps. It leaks through cracks people weren't watching. And by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's already too late to contain. It started small. Noah's school therapist was the first to notice. She'd worked with him for years, knew the way his shoulders usually curved inward, how his head tilted just slightly to compensate for pain. One afternoon, halfway through a routine session, she paused mid-sentence. Did you adjust his chair? She asked the aide. The aide shook her head, but Noah was sitting straighter. Not rigid, not forced, just easier, as if his body trusted itself a little more than it had the week before. A few days later, his private doctor frowned at a chart and asked Elliot a question that had no place in a sterile exam room. What changed at home? Elliot didn't have an answer that fit into medical language. There was no new medication, no revised therapy schedule, no miracle device. There was just singing. A nurse mentioned it casually during a late appointment. He laughs more when Maria's around, she said, as if laughter were a symptom worth noting. Real laughter, not the polite kind. Elliot said nothing. He was learning, finally, when silence was the better protection. But systems notice patterns, whether you explain them or not. A flagged improvement led to a review. A review led to questions. Questions led to the hospital ethics board. The words unapproved caregiving and emotional dependency floated across a long table, like accusations dressed as concern. Maria sat quietly beside Elliot, hands folded in her lap, listening to strangers dissect moments she lived one breath at a time. They asked about boundaries. They asked about qualifications. They asked about intent. Elliot answered calmly, but something in him hardened. He realized then how easily tenderness could be treated as a liability. That was when he decided to stop hiding. 2 weeks later, a pediatric rehabilitation conference filled a downtown auditorium. Rows of doctors, therapists, administrators, advocates, panels, PowerPoints, research citations. Midway through the afternoon, the doors at the back of the room opened. Elliot Hale walked in. No entourage, no security detail, just a man in a dark suit and the woman beside him. Maria wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back. She looked uncomfortable, but steady. Whispers rippled through the room. People recognized Elliot instantly. Wealth like his announced itself even when he didn't. He walked to the stage without asking permission. I won't take much time, he said into the microphone. His voice carried easily. I'm not here as a donor or a board member. He glanced at Maria. I'm here as a father. A screen behind him lit up. But it wasn't surveillance footage. It was a compilation of moments, short clips Elliot had requested after the cameras were shut down. Recorded with consent. With intention, Maria singing softly while stretching Noah's hands. Noah concentrating, tongue between his teeth, as a finger lifted. Laughter. Quiet conversations. Long silences that didn't feel empty. The room grew still. No charts. No metrics. Just dignity unfolding in real time. This, Elliot said, his voice steady but low, is what care looks like when it isn't afraid. He didn't name Maria's job title. He said, simply, "This is my son's family." That was the moment. Phones came out. Messages were sent. Someone posted a clip before Elliot even left the stage. By nightfall, the story was everywhere. Headlines argued. Comment sections burned. Experts debated boundaries while parents shared the video with shaking hands. But beneath the noise, one truth held. A child had been seen. And the world couldn't unsee. A change doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't arrive like a switch flipped or a headline rewritten. It arrives the way dawn does, quietly, almost apologetically, until one day you realize the dark has been retreating for a while. Mornings become the first proof. Maria wakes before the house stirs. She brews coffee that smells faintly of cinnamon and opens the curtains just enough to let the light in without startling Noah awake. When he does open his eyes, pain often greets him first, sharp, immediate, unfair. "Breathe with me," she says, every time, not through it. With it, she teaches him how to count his breaths, how to loosen his jaw, how to let pain pass without letting it define the hour. Some mornings he curses. Some mornings he cries. She never rushes him. Pain, she says, is already impatient enough. In the afternoons, Elliot watches, not from behind glass, not from another room. He sits at the kitchen table with unread emails glowing on his phone and learns a language. He never studied the pauses between words, the meaning of silence, the difference between helping and hovering. Late nights teach him the hardest lessons. Noah wakes sometimes, breath hitching, frustration spilling out in sharp bursts. Elliot's instinct is still to solve, to call a doctor, adjust a schedule, demand answers from someone, anyone. Maria stops him gently. "Listen first," she says. So he does. He learns that listening doesn't always come with a response. That some nights are about bearing witness, not repair. That presence can be an action, not an absence of one. And in a quiet room lit by a single lamp, Elliot begins to understand how often he confused control with care. Physical therapy brings its own small revolutions. At first, it's just a twitch of faint movement in Noah's index finger that could be mistaken for a spasm. The therapist freezes mid-note. Maria presses her lips together, afraid to breathe. "Did you do that?" the therapist asks. Noah tries again. The finger moves. Then, weeks later, a lift. Millimeters at first. Enough to make Noah laugh, then cry, then laugh again. Enough to make Elliot turn away, overwhelmed by the violence of hope returning. Doctors call it progress. Maria calls it patience, paying attention. Time stretches. Elliot sells one of his companies quietly. No announcement. No ceremony. He hands off responsibilities he once clutched like oxygen. He stops sleeping in his office. The couch at home becomes his, then the bed. People notice he's harder to reach. He doesn't mind. He starts driving Noah to appointments himself. Starts learning which songs calm him, which jokes land, which days require extra softness. He shows up not just physically, but wholly, imperfectly present. And while the world debates policies and boundaries, Maria begins something of her own. Caregivers start asking questions. Nurses linger after shifts. Parents approach her with eyes full of exhaustion and hope. She doesn't teach techniques. She teaches attention. Sit before you act, she tells them. Listen before you speak. Don't confuse speed with love. She teaches them to sing if they can, and to sit quietly if they can't. To treat bodies not as problems to be solved, but stories still being written. Months turn into years. Noah grows taller, stronger in ways no skin can fully explain. Some days are still hard. Some nights still break open old fears. But the house feels different now, lived in, heard. Change didn't happen all at once. It happened in rides to therapy, in shared meals, in choosing, again and again, to stay, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, it became a life. 6 years later, Noah stands at a podium. Not easily, not without effort. His legs tremble beneath him, the braces visible beneath pressed trousers. Metal catching the light when he shifts his weight. He could have hidden them tailored fabric, careful angles, but he didn't. He learned long ago that hiding costs more than it gives back. Graduation cords brush against his chest as he steadies himself. fingers tightening briefly around the edges of the lectern. The room is full parents, teachers, administrators, classmates who once spoke around him instead of to him. The air carries that familiar mix of perfume, paper programs, and something electric endings. Noah inhales. The room quiets. My father once thought protection meant control, he says. His voice is calm, not rehearsed into emptiness, but practiced into truth. The words land gently, without accusation. A few people glance toward Elliot. Elliot sits in the second row, hands folded tightly in his lap. His hair has more gray now. His shoulders no longer carry the rigid posture of a man braced for attack. He looks up at his son like the ground might tilt if he doesn't. I thought safety meant silence. Noah continues. A murmur moves through the crowd. Some recognize themselves in that sentence. Others feel it find them anyway. When I was younger, Noah says, I learned very quickly that it was easier to be quiet than to be inconvenient. Easier to disappear than to ask for help. His grip loosens on the lectern. But something changed. He says. He pauses, not for effect but because he needs the moment. His gaze moves to the left side of the room. Maria sits there, hands folded, eyes already shining. She wears a simple dress, the same kind she always favored, nothing that asks for attention. When Noah meets her eyes, she shakes her head slightly, as if to say this isn't about me. He smiles anyway. Someone stayed. He says. The word echoes. They stayed when it was uncomfortable, when it was slow, when it didn't look like progress yet. His voice tightens just slightly. They stayed when there was nothing to fix. Noah looks back out at the audience. And my father, he says, turning now, fully, learn how to stay to. Elliot's breath catches. The boy he once watched through screens now stands in front of hundreds of people. Unfiltered, unguarded, alive in ways Elliot once feared to imagine. But family, Noah says. And now his smile breaks open wide, unguarded, unmistakably real, is the people who stay when the cameras are off. For a fraction of a second, the room is silent. Then someone stands. Then another. Applause rises, not polite, not measured, but sudden and overwhelming. Chairs scrape back. People wipe their eyes openly. A teacher presses a hand to her mouth. A parent squeezes their child's shoulder. Noah blinks, surprised, as if he hadn't expected the truth to land so hard. He steps back from the podium carefully, breath unsteady now, emotion finally catching up with him. Elliot doesn't clap. His hands don't move. They can't. Tears spill down his face, uncontrolled, unashamed. He bows his head, shoulders shaking, overwhelmed by the weight of a simple, devastating realization. His son is not thanking him for protection. He is forgiving him for learning. Maria watches Elliot for a moment, then looks back at Noah, her own tears quiet, steady. The audience keeps standing long after Noah leaves the stage. And for the first time in his life, Noah doesn't rush to sit down. He stands, unsteady, determined. See the night. The house is quiet in a way it never used to be. Not the tense, monitored quiet of corridors watched by unseen eyes, but a lived-in stillness, warm and unafraid. The kind that settles after a long day when nothing is left to prove. Elliot waits in the kitchen long after Noah has gone to bed. The lights are low. The counters bear the soft evidence of use. A mug left to dry, a folded dish towel, crumbs from the cake someone insisted on cutting even though everyone was full. Through the open window, the city hums distantly. Present but no longer pressing, Maria steps in quietly, as she always does, moving as if she's still mindful of sleeping children even though Noah is nearly grown now. You should rest, she says gently. Elliot nods, but doesn't move. Instead, he reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out something small. It isn't wrapped. It isn't dramatic. He sets it on the table between them. A ring. Simple, unadorned, silver. Worn smooth, as if it has already lived a life before finding its way here. Maria frowns slightly, confused. Elliot, it's not money, he says quickly, almost too quickly. It's not a contract. She doesn't touch it. He turns it so the inside catches the light. Engraved there, in careful, unassuming letters, is a single word, present. Maria's breath catches not sharply, but deeply. She presses her lips together, as if holding something back. And for a long moment neither of them speaks. I didn't know what else to give you, Elliot says. His voice is rough, stripped of polish. You gave my son something I couldn't buy. You gave him himself back. Maria shakes her head. I just stayed, she says. Elliot nods. That's what I'm thanking you for. She finally picks up the ring, turning it between her fingers. It's cool to the touch, real. Outside, a car passes. Somewhere, a dog barks. Life continues. The cameras are gone. Elliot adds quietly. Maria looks up. All of them, he says. Every corridor, every room. I realized I don't want to live in a house that assumes the worst of the people inside it. She smiles, then a small, tired smile, full of understanding. Trust is a choice, she says. I know. Elliot replies, I'm late, but I know now. Later, Elliot stands in the hallway outside Noah's room. The door is open. Noah is asleep, one arm flung across the bed, his breathing slow and steady. The braces rest neatly beside the chair, forgotten for the night. On the dresser sits an old photo, Noah younger, Maria beside him, both laughing at something long past. Elliot watches for a moment, then he turns away. There is nothing left to monitor. No screens to check, no feeds to rewind, no alerts waiting to be answered. Because some things don't need watching, they need choosing. Choosing to listen instead of assume. Choosing to stay instead of control. Choosing to be present, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it's slow. Elliot switches off the last light and walks to bed. And somewhere maybe in this house, maybe far beyond it, a child is deciding whether to tell the truth, whether to trust. So the question lingers, quiet but insistent. What would you do if a child trusted you with the truth? Be someone who shows up.